Hi, welcome to Customer Love Stories, a podcast where we investigate why certain brands are loved or not loved by their customers. I'm your host, Robi Ganguly, CEO and co-founder of Apptentive. For those of you who don't know, Apptentive is a Seattle-based voice of the customer solution. But that's not what this podcast is about. Today, we're talking about customer love with Melanie Fox, Apptentive's own product manager. Mel, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I just started with Apptentive in January, so I am newer to the company, but I was previously a customer. I've worked in consumer mobile apps for the last 5 years at this point, have a really strong passion around mobile applications and just product management in general. So it's been really fun working at Apptentive. I also run my own business called Work for Your Beer. We like to work out and drink, which is a fun little side business I started back in 2016. And I'm also an aerialist, so I do like circus-y performances. So
Amazing.
Not a lot going on.
Lots going on. Well, let's start off the way we start this with everybody. Who or what are you a fan of?
So I thought about this question a lot before we did this interview, because I feel like I've gone through tons of phases of fandom, but the one thing that I kept going back to related to music. And as a teenager, I really got into like the emo alt rock music genre. And that's something that I still just really love listening to today. I've gone to tons and tons of concerts in this genre, and it makes me feel kind of nostalgic. So I brought my little Emo's Not Dead mug just to show off here. And it's such a silly thing, but I do think the community and just like the way music brings people together really resonates with folks no matter what age they are. And so that to me, I thought was one like silly little thing. I'm fans of a lot of things. I've grown from liking sports a ton to focusing more on craft beer with this business. And recently I've even been like super just interested in hyper local, not like big brand stuff, and focusing local. So yeah, I've got a little bit of fandom everywhere, but I did think the emo music was one that I thought, let's just talk about it.
Yeah. I think emo music as a category requires a little bit of definition. What does it mean to you? Like, how do you categorize bands and performances that really fall into emo music?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, emo is obviously short for emotional, so a lot of drama, which is probably why I really resonated with it as a teenager. But I do think that there's so many subcategories of this music genre. I mean, you have screamo, which is a little bit more intense. You have like almost like pop punk that fits into this category as well. And it's kind of all over the place. I mean, the bands that like I grew up listening to have evolved as musicians as well, which is really interesting. Bands like Brand New and Taking Back Sunday, and even like Fall Out Boy was like one of the kitschier like coming out, and even Panic at the Disco, which was, I remember when their first album came out, it was very circusy. This should have given me a premonition that I was eventually going to join the circus. But their style has shifted dramatically as well. And you kind of grow up with them, which I think is really interesting. Like, it's not like the style stayed static. It grew up as these bands grew up, and it just, I don't know, it really like hits you right in the heart.
Now, so you named a couple of bands that really fall into this category. And when you name those bands, what I'm curious about is, I think I'm familiar with most of them, but when you started listening to them, did you think of them as emo bands, or what was that evolution of that categorization for you? And then when did it transition to actually looking for bands that fit into that category?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up, it was in the MySpace days, just gonna age myself real quickly, where everyone was kind of in this weird little genre of discovering like new early music that at that time wasn't like readily available, because we didn't all just have Spotify where we could look and mix and match. And so like being able to identify like, ooh, I really like this sound, how can I find others that sound like that? was going to concerts. So like I would say, ooh, I really love the Starting Line. And I would go to a Starting Line show, and then I would learn of a band like the Hush Sound. And then the Hush Sound would go on tour with another band, and you would uncover them that way, which is like kind of an old school way of like finding out about other bands who fit into that genre. But it really was, it was an experience. And that's something that I feel like a lot of fandoms rely on, is having an experience that's different than something you've had before and seeking that out again. I mean, whether you relate that to sports, and like the first hockey game I ever went to was Pittsburgh Penguins. I grew up in Pittsburgh. I like still get very nostalgic when I smell an ice rink, because it brings me back to that moment and that experience that I then wanted to have again, you know? So music, I think, is just such a really good way to look at that, because going to concerts and viewing live music is such a different experience than just listening to the album.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And so like, what's it like being at an emo concert? What are you like as a fan in that environment?
That's a great question. Passionate, I would say. I think going to those concerts and literally just being able to like scream your heart out and know that no one around you is judging you because they're doing the same, like really allows you to embrace your inner weirdo and like just feel. I didn't really grow up learning about emotions. So the way that I felt things was through music, and like being able to say like, I resonate with this music because I'm angry or I'm frustrated or I'm sad, was how I dealt with things. And I've gone to therapy now, as you know, as we do in our 30s, and uncovering like, oh, like the way I escaped or the way I felt things was through music. Now I have to process those things a little bit differently and identify feelings. It's kind of interesting to connect them, but it does fall back to that. Feelings of whatever they may be, and then connecting them into a community.
Yeah. And so much about this podcast and this whole set of conversations we have with people is about connecting emotions with experiences, connecting emotions with teams or brands or organizations. And I guess it's in the name. Emo music is emotional, right? It's about these feelings. But you're saying to me something that's interesting, two parts that I'm hearing. One is you sort of grew with, you know, that like several of these bands you grew with, and they represented something that you connected with, but it also, as you started to grow, you felt like they continue to stay connected. Mm-hmm. And the second is the growing with wasn't just for you. When you go to an emo concert, you are feeling comfortable because you're around a bunch of people who are having that similar kind of experience. And as a result, instead of feeling like a weirdo, you're feeling connected, you're feeling similar, right? And so there's that sense of like, I belong here that happens at that concert for you. Is that right?
Yes, especially because I feel like a lot of people who got into this music in the beginning did so because they felt a little bit like an outcast, you know, like I felt like weird or different. And when I was in this space, all these other people who also are weird and different are finding one another and finding something that like unites all of us. And so it's funny now because like they have like this elder emo concept, which is basically like when you grew up, when emo music started, like you're now in your 30s, and the elder emo is a phrase for that. But I think it's really funny to like meet other elder emos. Like I had a friend who I didn't know liked this type of music, and we had a Friendsgiving, and he had brought it up, and then the entire evening we watched old music videos and just like screamed and sang. And then we eventually ended up having a surprise like emo themed birthday party for him, which was one of the better themed parties I've ever hosted. Would highly recommend. But it's so funny because like once we started talking about it, we immediately connected. We were like, oh my gosh, like what concerts did you go to? Like what have you, like what are you still listening to? Like are you going to any concerts now? Because this whole, like all of these bands are realizing that all of the folks who grew up listening to them still want to listen to them. So there's like 25-year reunion tours and stuff like happening like that, where these bands are going out and everyone's like, absolutely, I'm going to be there. And it's just so fun to like see that happen. It like brings out a little bit of like nostalgia and like just excitement that like, hey, people still care about this.
One thing that I'm curious about, and you were talking about this up front, is that there's this journey, and you kind of like go through waves of being a fan. You're not necessarily like lifelong fan, but clearly this arc has spanned multiple phases of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that you've gone through this growth, and you talk about the music and it growing with you. Is it weird to hear songs from like their first albums when you go to a concert or you put them on? Does it feel differently for you?
I definitely think it brings back waves of like me being in that time. Like I went to the Spill Canvas is the name of this band, one of their shows this past October. And I mean, they were my favorite band when I was 16. And they played some of their older music as they would at a show like this. And I just remember like being transported back to like the first time I saw them live when I was, 16. And so I do feel like it invokes like these like memories that you don't really like uncover on a normal daily basis until you're like brought back into it. And yeah, it's different. They've grown up a ton. They've changed their sound. They have different band members. But at the core of it, you're still like, like I loved this. And it just brings up such interesting like memories, I think.
Yep. What's the craziest thing you've done as a fan?
Oh boy. Well, I did, speaking of the Spill Canvas, I did drive 8 hours across Pennsylvania to go see them at a show after I had seen them like 3 days before. And I was like just 18 and was definitely not supposed to do that. And I just remember being like, oh, that can't be far. It's still in Pennsylvania. Just so you guys know, Pittsburgh and Philadelphia are pretty far apart. And so literally my friend and I road tripped across the state and went to their show there. And I feel like that for me, I was like, that was a commitment, like for a concert. I do have like another favorite band that's kind of they're more prog rock, but like kind of still in the genre. And they had a lifer program that you paid $150 for. And this was in college. So for me, that was like an investment. But if you joined, you then got access to any show for the rest of them being a band. You would get on the guest list for free. And I was like, it's worth it. I love this band. I'm going to be a lifer. And there's only like 145 of us right now. And the band is called The Deer Hunter. I love them. They are incredible performers. And I've become friends with another lifer in Charlotte, and we had no idea that we liked the band. And we started talking about it one day, and he brought up, oh, I'm a lifer. I was like, I'm a lifer. And so that was probably another one where I was like, hey, I'm investing this money in college, which doesn't seem like a lot now, but in college, I was like, all right, I'm making the commitment. I'm going to buy into it. And it's really paid off. Honestly, they tour all the time. So
That's really cool. And what has led you to stop being a fan of certain emo bands? Do you have like stories or experiences where somebody lost your fandom? Because when you answer the question, you're talking about emo music, and now we've talked about several bands. We're talking about the Deer Hunter, where you're a lifer. Can you think of situations where some of those bands have fallen out of favor for you?
Yeah, there have been a couple of bands where allegations have surfaced where you're like, nope, I don't want anything to do with them. I'm not going to listen to them. I'm not going to go to concerts where they're at. There have been some specifically with like women that you're just like, nope, I don't mess with that. And so that's always tough, especially if you're like a huge fan out of the gate. One of my favorite bands, their lead singer had allegations against him, and I was like, all right, we're going to step back from them until either this gets sorted or the truth comes out or whatever may happen. And I still actually haven't revisited their music at all since then, because it just left a really bad taste in my mouth. It's like, I want to be supporting people who are good at their craft, but also good people. So yeah, there's definitely been some abandonment of some of the bands along the way. But I think that's expected, especially as you grow and evolve. Like there are certain things that are very important to me from a values perspective. And if they're not meeting them, I'm I'm very willing to walk away from those scenarios. So
Yep. So I think I'm hearing you say, these bands are made up of people, and when people act in ways that let you down, you're fine walking away. That's enough for you to say, okay, that's not going to fit. Now, when you think about it from the perspective of the music and how it touches you, have you seen bands change their style, or the kind of even the classification of being emo versus not, that has led you to make some changes in being a fan?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, there will be folks that'll say, well, they sold out, or like they went from emo into like pop rock, which like a good example of that is a band called All Time Low. They were definitely more like punk rocky coming into it, and then migrated into a more pop sound. One part of that is marketing. Part of that is I want to appeal to more people, so I'm going to have a more appealing sound. But it didn't like it. That like didn't make me like them less. It made me think, okay, cool. Like they're trying out a new style and it's working for them. By the way, that's like really what made them blow up. So I think that's really cool because you get to support them along the way. Doesn't make any of their old music less appealing to me. I'll still listen to their old music. I might not listen to their new music as much because it's not as like interesting to me. But that doesn't make me dislike them. Like it goes in phases, I think.
Yep. Now, let's connect this to your side hustle, Work for Your Beer.
Yeah.
Work for Your Beer strikes me as a place where beer fandom and exercise fandom intersect. Is that a good understanding of what's happening?
Yes, I like to say we're a pretty specific niche of folks, but there is a lot of passion in this space. People who enjoy both working out and craft beer. It's definitely a fandom. I mean, the number of run clubs you see across the country, beer yoga is huge. Bike and brews, like lots of people who are cycling also love a good post-cycle beer. And even just with like our brand itself, we kind of exist more as like a lifestyle brand for the folks who enjoy working out and drinking, but people just love like Work for Your Beer too. So like we had fans start Work for Your Beer Wednesday, where every Wednesday they post their workout and they get sweat checks in with people. So it's been really cool to see like how that community has surfaced, because it's always it existed before Work for Your Beer was a thing, but we just gave them a community to be able to then say like, oh, hey, you like this too? Like you're following Work for Beer, you know who they are? Like, oh, let's go to a beer yoga class together. So yeah, it's been really fun growing and evolving in this weird little niche, but very strong passions for both fitness and craft beer.
When you think about it, what was it that led you to see that insight of the intersection and then take the action to create something around it?
Yeah, so the way Work for Your Beer was born, my co-founder and I started going to these beer yoga classes across the city, and we would identify one and we'd go and be like, oh, this is amazing. We'd meet someone and they'd say, hey, have you been to this one, which was at a different brewery? No, we didn't even know they had a class. So then we would go there and we meet some other people. Oh, have you been to this one? And so we kept finding these little pockets of people who were like, hey, I go to all 4 of these because it's $5 for yoga and a beer, and like I don't have to pay for a studio membership, and like I get to support my favorite brewery. And so I shot a text message to my co-founder and I said, business idea. What if we make a directory for all these classes that are happening? Because if we want this information, other people probably do too. And we were just using a janky spreadsheet that we had, which literally was like brewery, day, time, cost, and ended up turning it into a service and ultimately into a brand and into more of like the like influencer space. But that's really what we kept kind of uncovering these areas that we were like, I want to learn more about this. And the one thing that we did at the beginning, which I think is really, really important for like cultivating community, was we gave as much information as we possibly could. So we're like super transparent at Work for Your Beer, but like, I want to know what the parking situation is like. I want to know if they have AC. Is my dog allowed? Are they going to take cash or just credit? Like, we gave every possible piece of information so that someone would feel comfortable walking into one of these classes or run clubs and not have to worry about any part of it. And I think that like open, inviting attitude like is really what resonated with people out of the gate. They're like, okay, I don't have to feel intimidated by this.
Yeah, that makes sense. How did you cultivate your first 100 work for your beer fans?
So I have a marketing background. So my strategy around building up our fan base was to look at other people in the community or businesses in the community that I knew our potential fans would like. So one of the breweries in Charlotte, Noda Brewing, it's amazing. They host a really big run club every Wednesday and every Sunday. I said, I'm gonna, one, go out to these run clubs and meet people, but two, from a social media perspective, I'm gonna start interacting and engaging with their fans because I know that if they're a run club member, they're gonna like what we're doing because they probably wanna find other run clubs in the city. And so I spent a lot of time and effort interacting with people that I just thought, hey, if you like this thing, you'll probably like our thing. And it worked. We built our following is around 35,000 right now. And that's across the entire US with a really strong base in the Southeast. And a lot of it really started with just like manually trying to engage with people until it started picking up in as more of like a fad. So yeah, that was the initial strategy of just like very manual marketing outreach, essentially. But it worked.
When you think about the formula that applies to your core audience of fans, what's that formula really look like?
As far as their interests or why they want to be a part of, why they want to be a fan?
Yeah, I think what I'm curious about is, as a marketer, you think about audiences, you think about personas, you think about the common traits and the value props that pull them in. And clearly you've talked about a few of those. But now with 35,000 fans, there must be some aspect of it where you're like, yes, they're right in the heart. And that's what I mean by the formula of like, the heart is this, the reason they find us is this, the reason we keep them is this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like out of the gate, the three things that I always emphasize when, let's just say I'm doing some sort of targeting marketing or targeted marketing, I'm looking for craft beer enthusiasts. I'm looking for folks who are interested in health and wellness. It doesn't have to be like a fitness freak, but if they're, they're conscious, health conscious. And a lot of times too, our brand actually appeals more to women, which is very odd for the beer space. The beer space is traditionally very male dominated, but 70% of our audience is actually female. Part of that is because we're a very inclusive space. And also the other part is like yoga gets a lot more from like a female traction than male, just from our audience perspective. So those are generally the first three things that I look at. But keeping them around is the real question, right? Like, why do people continuously engage with us and follow us and open our emails? And I think it comes back to humanizing our brand. We've gone through a lot of experiments from how we do business as a company. We've pivoted through a pandemic. But the one thing that really resonates with people is that we're human. So you think about like why people are passionate about sports teams or bands or whatever it may be, like it comes back to the person, right? Or the people who are playing on that team. My co-founder and I, like, we've done tests on this. So I hope this doesn't come off as like vain, but like people like seeing our faces. People like being like, oh, I know them, which is cool as a person just like walking around Charlotte when they're like, oh my God, your work for your beer, which like, yes, I guess I'm Mel, but yeah, I'm work for your beer. And that sense of familiarity is really, really important. So when people see like, hey, like Mel and Alicia are recommending this thing, like I trust them as humans. So like, I'm going to go check out that brand. Whereas before we kind of masked ourselves behind the brand. And people are like, I don't really know what this is. Like you can even see like our Instagram page, which is our primary like social media following. our image is not our logo. It's like an outline of us with our Work for Your Beer shirts on, showing that, hey, this is like two females who run this business. So I think a lot of it does come back to that human nature of like, who I'm following is real, and like I trust them, or I think they're funny, or like, hey, they've been like super honest about XYZ. Like we're very honest and transparent and authentic, and I think that that goes a long way.
Why do you think you lose fans?
That is a good question. I think sometimes we gain the wrong fans. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that a couple of times where we've had bigger brand partnerships that have brought over some people who maybe wouldn't traditionally seek us out or find us. And I play this game where when I know that we're doing that, but the next post that I do, I make sure it's very, very, very true to our brand and our core, usually probably something more like women focused or inclusivity focused. And then I'll watch people come and I'll watch people go. And you know what? I am totally fine with that, because the community that I want to be nurturing are folks who do care about things like being inclusive and care about human rights and care about women in the beer industry. So if they come in and they don't like what they see and they walk away, I'm completely fine with that. It doesn't hurt my feelings. In fact, I prefer they do if they don't align with what we stand for. So that's probably the primary way we see that, is like they came in like interested because like, oh, it's a female in beer. And then sometimes they exit. That's totally fine. Also, like, we've seen our audience like grow and evolve. Like we started in 2016, like a lot of the folks who started along with us, like now they're married, now they have children, now maybe they're not at the brewery as much, and like they've evolved and they've changed. And it goes back to that similar thing I talked about earlier, which is like, you have these phases of fandom, and that's totally fine. Like you're allowed to outgrow things and change as a human. And I think that happens too. Sometimes they just are like, hey, I'm not even interested in craft beer anymore, so I don't have to follow you guys. And again, that's fine.
Yep. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up product management and customer love in talking to you, right? Because as somebody who is talking about what you're a fan of and the emotions and that notion of growing up with something and being part of a community, and then somebody who's clearly built a community like that, that's got 35,000 fans that are really connected. When you're product managing a software product, how do you translate that? What are you bringing across from those kinds of things?
Yeah, well, I think the concept of like humanizing the brand is really important. It might not be someone's face, but I think there's a lot. I mean, you can see this in app store reviews all the time. People talk at brands as if they aren't humans, as if they aren't people who have thoughts and feelings and like a reasoning for why they did X, Y, or Z. And so I do think humanizing the brand is really important. Being responsive. Companies whose response is to not respond to things drives me absolutely bonkers. I think that if you have customers or an audience that they deserve to be in the know and treated like they're human, just like you hope that you're treated like human. So I do think that's one thing that's really, really important. Being responsive, making sure that you're actually being true to what you say you're going to do. You know, I do think that a lot of times people will just like write it off as if like, oh yeah, we'll totally bring this back to the engineers and the engineers will do something with it. Like, no, like, let's make sure that we actually document that and process that and close the feedback loop. Because if I'm someone who's reaching out to a brand and say, hey, I found this thing, like it would be really important to me if maybe you made this update so that I could do X, Y, Z, and then they do it, and then they tell me they did it, that makes me a fan, right? That's where I have that, aha, they do care about me, and they care about me so much that they took my piece of feedback and implemented it in their product. Like that's really meaningful. And you can do that at scale. It doesn't have to be manually one response for every single person. You can do that at scale once you get good at it.
Or you could just use us
Yeah,
since
exactly. That's what I was
you came
like,
here and you built that, right? Like, I
yeah.
mean, it's funny now I hear you say that. I'm like, oh, I see and understand. I'm really proud of what we built with interaction response targeting. But now I see and understand from your perspective as somebody looking at that problem, putting it into our product. You're like, oh, you can do that. And you can do that at scale. You can get back to people. And like, how do you think about prioritizing those kinds of lovable moments in your own roadmap?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because the concept of prioritization from a product management perspective is all over the board. But we all know what we want to do is produce the best product that's going to impact the most customers in the most meaningful way. And so we get, I mean, as a B2B business, we get feedback. As a B2C business, you are getting feedback every day from every angle in any, like, it's overwhelming oftentimes for product managers who are in B2C standpoints. But from an actual prioritization standpoint, I'm actually like pretty analytical in how I approach that. Like, I want to make sure that we're evaluating requests in a meaningful way. I ask why a lot because oftentimes people will ask for things, but I want to know why they're asking for that to see if we can solve in a different way. But to drive the roadmap, I mean, really, it's a whole slew of items that get kind of ranked against one another to make sure that, like, hey, we are focusing on the right thing for our customers. And being able to say, hey, here's what we're working on and why is the most important thing out of all of that. I can say, hey, I'm going to work on this thing no one asked for. Why, right? Like, if someone comes to me and says, hey, why are you working on X feature? I want to be able to say, because XYZ, plus this is going to impact these types of customers. And by the way, this is going to set up for us for success in the long term. But if you can't defend the why on things, it's like, what are we doing?
Well, and how do you measure customer love in order to have credibility around the why?
Well, so from a product management perspective, customer love is really interesting. Obviously, we have at Apptentive like our love dialogue, which measures that directly. But I always look at customer love from like an engagement and an experience perspective, and also adoption. So if we are launching a new feature and we think, hey, this thing's going to be amazing, we're getting this out into the world, everyone's asked for it, and then 2 people use it, something's not going right, right? So I always try to mesh together the experience metric, the engagement metric, and the adoption metric to tell the true story of, did what we created actually meet the needs of what our customers have? And guess what? It's never done. With software development, like, there's no end. Like, you're continuously iterating and updating and getting new features out. Like, there's no done state. So it's kind of interesting to be like, all right, we're going to go through this process. We didn't get adoption. Why? Again, I'll go back to the why question. Was it marketing? Was it not what they wanted? Is it not solving their problem? How do we go back and revisit how to solve their problem?
That makes sense. And last question for you. You were a customer of ours before you joined us.
I was.
And so you have a pretty unique perspective as somebody who was on one side consuming our products and a fan. And you were enough of a fan that you said, hey, I want to come join and make this better because I know as a fan, I can see where we could go. What's it like to make that transition and relate it back to this being a fan and getting involved in the community?
Yeah, not only was I a fan when I was obviously using the tool when I was working at a previous company, I went to another company and I said, we need Apptentive, and was trying to honestly get that tool embedded there as well, because the value that Apptentive provides out of the box was exponential to any other tool that I had used as a product manager. And in fact, I met with one of my old devs from that company the other day, and I was like, yeah, I'm working for Apptentive now, I'm super excited. And he was like, Apptentive's like the best tool we use just in general. And I was like, God, I wish I could have, like, I didn't pay you to say that. Like, I wish I could have recorded you saying that, because even him as a developer recognized the value that it provided our company. I mean, I literally went from the apps that I was managing, I inherited two smart home mobile apps. They had 2.7, 2.8 stars whenever I started. Apptentive, I integrated within like the first 3 or 4 months of me being a product manager, went to 4.8 stars, stayed static the entire time I was a product manager there, which is just one component of like the entire like suite of features that are involved with Apptentive. But that alone drove motivation internally, that drove a lot more trust from our customers out of the gate. Because imagine you just bought a $20,000 HVAC system and you're about to go download an app to go control it, and it has 2.7 stars. What is your initial reaction? I don't want that. Why would I use this app? Like immediately you feel on edge and like it's going to be a bad experience. So you even nitpick, like it's a mental thing. Like you nitpick it out of the gate, like, oh, this is a terrible experience. Why am I using this? No. So a lot of it's like psychological too. But for me, it's been really cool, like seeing the stuff that I asked for as a customer coming to life now, because there are very specific things that I was like, ooh, this would help me in my day-to-day. I would convey that feedback. And then now coming into it, I'm helping execute that, which is really cool. And it's just really awesome to see the impact that our tool has on some big companies. Like I didn't realize the scope of like all of our customers who use this, but there are very large organizations that use this that you're like, we've probably made a really dramatic impact in how their product is going to market, which is very, very cool.
Yeah. And we're super lucky to have you on board as a fan, now driving customer love with us. But most importantly, I'm really glad to spend some time with you to learn a little bit about how you think about it. I now know more about your emo music fandom. I know about your journey. I think I learned a couple of things. One is, being part of that community and actually going to those shows and being surrounded by like-minded people is really, a warm embrace. And you talked about not feeling like a freak, but actually feeling like you fit in, which is awesome. And then I think I really picked up on, as you were talking about building the community around Work for Your Beer, understanding who really fits in and how to align yourself with, for example, beer brands that align with that community, and that being a consistent process of alignment and refinement and trying to find the right connection with your community that you've built there. So this has been really awesome. If people wanted to find and connect with you, where would they look?
So primarily from a social media perspective, you can find me running the Work for Your Beer account, which is just at Work for Your Beer. You can also find me on LinkedIn if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. And even if you want to email me through Apptentive, you can find me that way. So I'm around, you can access me. Totally up for talking craft beer or fitness or aerial or emo. If you're an elder emo and you want to just have a throwback jam, just let me know.
I love it. Elder emo. Well, we will include the links in our show notes as well. And speaking of show notes, I want to encourage our listeners to check out the resources we will link to if you want to dive deeper on any of the topics we discussed today. And I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and give us a rating or review at www.ratethispodcast.com/CLS. Mel and I thrive on feedback, good and bad, so that we can get better. And your feedback would be awesome. We wish you all the best and hope you continue to deliver customer love in everything you do. Thanks.